There is a certain kind of person who, when things are genuinely falling apart, when the workload is impossible and the exhaustion is real and the situation has clearly exceeded what one person should be carrying alone, will look at the people around them who are offering to help and feel something that is not relief. It is closer to discomfort, a tightening, a quiet but insistent internal voice that says, I have this, I am fine, I do not need that. And they will smile and say some version of no, really, I am okay. And then go home and continue managing everything alone in the dark, past the point where managing alone makes any rational sense. And somewhere underneath the composure, they know this. They know they are not okay. They know they could use the help. And they still cannot take it. If you recognize that, you have probably also received the feedback that comes with it. That you are too independent. That you never let people in. That it is exhausting trying to help someone who won't be helped. And you will have nodded at that feedback with the same polite composure you bring to everything else. And it will have changed very little because the feedback assumes the problem is a decision, and the problem is not a decision. It never was. The world has a particular story about people who don't accept help. The flattering version is that they are strong, capable, self-sufficient. The less flattering version is that they are stubborn, prideful, emotionally unavailable, afraid of vulnerability. Both versions share the same fundamental misunderstanding, which is that the behavior is a choice being made in the present rather than a pattern that was installed in the past. And that misunderstanding is exactly why the usual advice, I just ask for help, just let people in, just be vulnerable, lands somewhere between useless and mildly insulting. You are not failing to choose vulnerability. You are operating a nervous system that learned through specific and repeated experience that vulnerability was not safe. And that lesson does not uninstall itself because someone pointed out it was there. What we are actually talking about is hyper-independence. Not as a personality type, not as a character trait, not as a cultural value about pulling yourself up and handling your own problems. As a psychological adaptation. A sophisticated, coherent, well-intentioned defense mechanism that was built to protect someone from a specific kind of harm and that has been running continuously ever since, regardless of whether the original threat is still present. There is significantly more going on beneath the surface of this pattern than most conversations about it ever reach. Here is the neuroscience underneath it, translated out of clinical language and into something that actually describes the experience. The brain has a threat detection system centered in the amygdala that operates below conscious awareness and whose primary job is to recognize patterns that preceded harm in the past and activate a protective response before harm can occur again. This system does not distinguish between physical threats and emotional ones. It does not distinguish between threats from the external environment and threats from the social environment. What it registers is, the last time something that looked like this happened, something bad followed. And it responds accordingly with urgency before you have time to think about whether the response is appropriate to the current situation. For people who struggle to accept help, what the brain learned through early and repeated experience is that the act of needing something from another person preceded one of several painful outcomes. The need was met with disappointment, with criticism, with conditions attached that made the help cost more than managing alone would have. With absence, the person simply not being there. With reversal, where the person who was supposed to help instead required help themselves, leaving the child to figure out both problems alone. These are not exotic or dramatic experiences. They are extremely common. And for a developing nervous system trying to build a reliable model of how the world works, a sufficiently consistent message that needing things from people leads to pain is enough to update the operating logic permanently. Independence stops being a preference and becomes a survival protocol. The brain is not being stubborn. It is being accurate as about the world it learned in, even when the world has since changed. Research on attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and extended extensively by subsequent researchers, documents this process with precision. The attachment patterns formed in early relationships become the templates through which all subsequent relationships are interpreted. Children who experience caregivers as unreliable, unavailable, or unpredictable, not necessarily neglectful in dramatic ways, but inconsistently present, emotionally unavailable, or themselves overwhelmed, often develop what researchers call avoidant attachment. In adulthood, this shows up as a deep and usually unconscious preference for self-sufficiency, a discomfort with dependence in any direction, and a nervous system that reads offers of help not as relief but as exposure. Because the last time you needed something and let yourself be seen needing it, the outcome was something the brain cataloged as dangerous. There is a specific developmental pattern worth naming here, because it shows up so consistently in the histories of people who carry this. It is the experience of the parentified child. The child who, for whatever reason, found themselves managing more than their developmental stage could reasonably accommodate. This is not always the result of dramatic circumstances. Sometimes it is a parent who was emotionally fragile and unconsciously leaned on the child for regulation. Sometimes it is a family environment where emotional needs were considered indulgent and competence was the primary currency of worth. Sometimes it is simply the experience of being the responsible one, the capable one, the one who handled things while others didn't, until handling things alone became the only reliable way to ensure they got handled at all. The lesson absorbed in those environments is not articulated in words. It is absorbed in the body, in the nervous system, as a foundational operating principle. The only person you can reliably count on is yourself. And that principle, once installed at sufficient depth, runs continuously regardless of evidence to the contrary. This is not weakness. It is not stubbornness. It is not emotional immaturity. It is a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do, running the programming that kept you safe in the environment where the programming was written, even after you have left that environment entirely. And it is worth stating clearly that this is not a worse way of being than the alternative. People who move through the world with high self-reliance and low need for external support carry real capabilities that people wired differently do not have. The ability to function independently under pressure. The ability to maintain composure when circumstances are difficult. The resourcefulness that comes from having solved problems alone for long enough that problem solving becomes fluent. These are genuine strengths. The question is not whether the adaptation was intelligent. But whether it is costing more than it is currently worth. Here is the counterintuitive layer that most conversations about hyperindependence never quite reach. The person who cannot accept help is almost always the person everyone else can lean on. They are the reliable one, the capable one, the one who shows up for other people without being asked and without making it complicated. They give help with a fluency and a generosity that is real and earned. What they cannot do, and this asymmetry is almost always present, is receive it. And this asymmetry reveals something important about what the help refusal is actually protecting. It is not protecting against weakness. It is protecting against something more specific and more tender than that. The experience of being in need and having that need matter to someone. Of being seen as not okay and having that be tolerated, even welcomed, rather than met with the responses the nervous system learned to anticipate. Accepting help requires a particular kind of vulnerability that is different from the general vulnerability of being imperfect or struggling. It is the vulnerability of allowing another person to witness your actual state, and trusting that what they do with that witness will not harm you. For people whose early experience taught them that this kind of witness was unsafe, the protection against it runs very deep. The cost of that protection over time is a quality of aloneness that is structural rather than circumstantial. You can be surrounded by people who genuinely want to help and still be profoundly alone because the mechanism that would allow connection at that depth is being guarded against as if it were dangerous. Because for a long time it was. The physical toll of this is real and worth naming. Research on chronic stress and allostatic load, the cumulative wear on the body of sustained stress without adequate recovery, consistently shows that social support is one of the most significant buffers against long-term health consequences of stress. Not in a vague motivational sense, but in measurable physiological terms. The nervous system of a person who has genuine access to social support recovers from stressors faster. Cortisol returns to baseline more quickly. Inflammatory markers are lower. The body is not carrying it all alone. For people who are chronically managing everything independently without that buffer, not because they lack people who would help, but because they cannot allow the help in, the body is absorbing a level of accumulated stress that it was not designed to absorb continuously. The self-reliance that feels like strength is, over a sufficient time frame, quietly expensive in ways the person cannot always attribute correctly, because the cost accumulates gradually, and there is no single moment of breakdown to point to. Just an ongoing low-grade, bone-deep exhaustion that makes complete sense once you understand how much has been carried, for how long, without ever being set down. There is a way through this that does not require dismantling the self-reliance entirely, which is important to understand because the self-reliance is not the problem. It is a genuine strength that was built through real experience and that has real value. What the research on attachment and interdependence suggests is that the brain's threat assessment around receiving help is not fixed. It is a learned association, and learned associations can be updated. Not quickly, not through insight alone, but through repeated small experiences that provide evidence the threat model was drawing on incomplete data. Psychologists sometimes describe this as earned security, the gradual accumulation of experiences of needing something and having it met without the anticipated harm, which over time creates a competing data set for the nervous system to draw on when assessing whether it is safe to be seen as needing something. This does not happen through grand gestures of vulnerability. It happens in small moments, a request that feels almost embarrassingly minor, a disclosure that feels fractionally more honest than usual, An acceptance of help that the nervous system said was dangerous, which turned out not to be. Each small instance that runs contrary to the installed threat model is a data point, and data points accumulate. You are not broken for being this way. You are not broken for struggling with something that most people find easy, and you are not broken for having built something protective and functional and thoroughly yours around the experience of needing and being let down. The armor is real and it was built for real reasons and it has served real purposes. The question that is worth sitting with, slowly and without pressure, is simply whether the weight of carrying it is still worth what it is protecting you from. Not whether you should stop being self-reliant. Not whether vulnerability is always safe. But whether the specific people in your current life are drawing on a threat assessment that was written about different people in a different time, and whether there is the faintest possibility that some of them might handle your actual state, your actual need, your actual not okayness, differently than the people who installed the programming did. If this landed somewhere specific, somewhere below the surface, somewhere that felt less like a description and more like an explanation of something you have been living for a long time without quite having the right words for, that is worth paying attention to. The pattern underneath this one goes deeper than a single video can follow. The way this connects to how you form relationships, how you experience intimacy, how you move through the world when the load gets genuinely heavy, there is more of that story to tell. And if you are ready to keep following it, it is here. Dear viewer, if you found value in this video, like it and share it with friends and family. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell icon so that you will be notified every time we upload a new video. Thank you for watching until the end. We will see you in our next video. Until then, stay safe and stay blessed.